Delivering this week's must-watch workplace storylines, this is Bloomberg Law's Punching In, for those of you listening in Washington and across the globe.
Hey folks, thanks for punching in with us. I'll be joined on today's episode by Joseph McCartin. Joe is an expert on U.S. labor law and social and political history. His research sort of focuses on the intersection there of labor organization and politics. So I thought Joe would be a great person to put in a broader context a quite interesting labor development, not from this past immediate weekend, but the one before that, where a group of software engineers that would have been one of the earliest group of coders to organize. It's quite difficult to organize in Silicon Valley and in the tech sector. They actually were able to obtain a settlement from a company named Lanetix for $775,000 for purported labor violations. And by way of background, I'll say that the basic story here is what happened was there was a woman at Lanetix who wanted more paid leave was her main issue, and she organized her coworkers into a Slack internal messaging channel to sort of talk about how they could form a union and sort of get management to increase their leave. Management somehow got wind of this group, and the woman was fired shortly after the effort started. Her coworkers, though, who were part of the group, there's about 14 of them, moved ahead with the process. They ended up filing a petition to the labor board that would have given them an election to actually form a union. But shortly before that happened, they were called into a staff meeting and they were summarily fired. They actually walked out of this meeting to find out their laptops were gone and they didn't have their jobs anymore. So they filed a complaint alleging that this was unlawful retaliation to the National Labor Relations Board. And that's what resulted in the settlement. So this is obviously an interesting development here. Organizing the tech sector is sort of its own beast. So I thought Joe would be a great person to put all that in context for us.
And I didn't state the obvious there, which is that Joe is a professor at Georgetown's Kalmanovitz Institute for Labor and the Working Poor.
Hey, Joe, how are you? Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Hassan. Good to be with you.
So we did speak about this Lanetix story when we were doing some of our earlier reporting. So you followed this story a bit over time, but I don't necessarily want to ask you a very specific question just because I think your broad understanding of the history of this area is useful. So I just want to ask you what your thoughts are on the latest development here, the fact that these folks did get some compensation, but obviously, Lanetix, there's not a union at Lanetix. And a quote from Bjorn Westergaard, who became the face of this group, was, "I wanted to plant a flag here," right? So that hasn't happened, but they did get compensation. What are your thoughts generally on that sort of outcome?
Right. I think it's kind of a mixed outcome. On the one hand, you could say it's a victory for the workers, that they got Lanetix to pay them $775,000. And although the company is not admitting wrongdoing, the fact that it is paying them in this settlement, I think the workers can see as a victory. On the other hand, the union flag has not been planted in the world of coders yet. And as a result of the way this played out, the company ended up firing these workers. And an effort to form a union with the Communication Workers of America was sidetracked by what the company did. And while the workers now win some payback, the union hasn't come to this company or even to, largely to the coder world.
Right. As the case proceeded, there was actually a point in time where the labor board issued a formal complaint, and they were actually going to part of when they took the case to court, they were trying to get an injunction that would have required the company to give these folks their jobs back with some back pay, et cetera, et cetera. But obviously, that remedy was put aside in favor of the settlement. But so in terms of that being sort of what you're describing as a partial victory, how do you see, in terms of the future of organizing in this sector? In reporting on this again earlier, we spoke with some other folks. Kate Bronfenbrenner is one who mentioned that this is sometimes a strategy that companies will employ to keep a union out. Just because you have more control, it's easier to run a business if you don't have to necessarily bargain with your workforce. So, talk about that in terms of the future of organizing in light of how this went.
What happened in this case is all too common. This is how employers often deal with a union drive. That is simply fire the people who are leading it. In this case, they fired 14 people.
Right. It was the entire engineering component.
The entire group.
Yeah.
So that doesn't often happen. And it was a clear violation of labor law, which is what the NLRB was indicating. And this all too often happens. It is a strategy. Employers use it broadly, but rarely in so sweeping a manner as happened here. And I think what that indicates is just how dangerous this employer saw a union coming in was to the model under which they operate. They don't want to collectively bargain. This tech industry is really an industry that's grown up outside of collective bargaining. And I think those who run the management culture of that industry are determined to keep collective bargaining out. And the size of this settlement shows how much they're willing to pay to do that.
Right, nearly $1 million here, and you're obviously the tech sector in Silicon Valley itself is a fairly new, started basically in my own lifetime when I was almost a kid. So in terms of that being a new but fast-growing part of the economy and probably the most important part of our modern economy, I want you to talk about sort of some dynamics that are specific to that world, right? A lot of these workers here were pretty well-paid folks, and in fact, they were able to find a job there. Or I think the entire group of 14 folks are now working elsewhere as software engineers. And actually, this relates to a report from the past week based on Facebook's answers to Congress, right? And one of the questions in there was about, tell us about your security team, right? Tell us about the folks you have going through all your data and all your advertising stuff to make sure there isn't abusive content being posted, there isn't fake content being posted, that people aren't being doxxed or abused, and so forth and so on. And part of their answer was Facebook answered that we hire, I don't want to flub the number, but they said, I think 20,000 people. And then they sort of vaguely mentioned that basically it seems that a substantial amount of those people are contractors, right? So in terms of when you say strategies to keep unions out, that's another one we see in the tech sector. Facebook, Microsoft, a lot of these big companies contract out certain components like their software engineering or the security services. To talk a bit about those specific dynamics in the tech sector, the fact that a lot of these folks are so well paid and oftentimes they're actually not full-time employees,
That's right. In the tech industry, we see, again, something that is increasingly characteristic of our labor market, but is really visible in the tech sector, and that is contracting and even subcontracting, what we are now beginning to call the fissuring of the workplace.
Right.
As there are levels of contracting introduced between the main employer and those who are actually doing the work. And that often happens. In this case, these workers work directly for the company, and that's what allowed them to be able to organize. But the union movement in tech will have a more difficult hill to climb because subcontracting of work is really predominant in that industry.
And obviously the big issue there on the political side, as you said, and I'm sure the scholar who popularized the phrase fissured economy will be slighted that I don't remember his name.
David Weil.
Thank you, David Weil. That's right. So that term is obviously in common parlance on Congress now, and part of the one solution that at least the left and Democrats proposed to deal with that is changing the rules for joint employment, which is a topic that comes up repeatedly on this podcast. So we'll definitely keep following that and see how lawmakers choose to respond, and maybe specifically to these dynamics in the tech sector. But thanks so much for joining me and talking about this, Joe.
Thank you, Hassan.
All right, that's it for this week, folks. Thanks for punching in with us for the Labor Desk's Monday Morning Musings. For more coverage, be sure to check out our website where the Punching In column is hosted. That's news.bloomberglaw.com. And of course, you can always follow me on Twitter at Hassan Kanu. See you next week.